CWPA Remote. Special Diversity Edition.
Omar will kind of give an introduction of himself and how the Alliance got formed. But I think one of the biggest things that I take away from the focus is just being able to really nurture. Omar.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. We were just talking about this. The Alliance got formed through a lot of us, sharing our experiences. When I came into the sport in the 90s, I was literally probably the only athlete of color. I was constantly told that I shouldn't be playing the sport. When I got to college, it was more the same. People would drop the N-bomb on me all the time, and there would be no recourse. And it was between coaches and officials as well, and that kind of propagated to the Olympic level. And so, this year, after the George Floyd incident, a bunch of us got together and started talking about how we could institute change. And USA Water Polo released a statement saying that they were fighting with us, but they didn't want to actually do anything that would affect change. And so we asked for some things, including a zero tolerance policy, funding for education, and objective research measures to look at, minority-based programs and rates of high school and college graduation and incarceration rates and sexual assault rates, and see if we could correlate that financially to have cities help subsidize programs so that they could save money. And we also wanted to create an educational platform for coaches and officials and for everybody to just do better. We asked Water Polo to help us, and we got just radio silence. So, March of this year, we started the Alliance up, and initially it was just, 4 or 8 of us, and we had one Zoom call, and it was just a safe place for all of us to talk. And that exponentially grew into the Alliance for Diversity and Equity within Water Polo. And, we initially started with those 4 things that I told you about, the educational platform, funding for education with the coaches, trying to get organizations to institute zero tolerance policy, and then research. And then that grew into, now we have a social media division, and we have multiple subcommittees, and we're actually a real entity, the Alliance for Diversity and Equity within Water Polo. And, we're having more of these conversations, and we're trying to get more people involved and spread the word. And so we're happy to be on this call with you.
Is Akari still on?
I'm here. Hello.
Beautiful. So Akari came on with us early with the Alliance and has been instrumental of helping keeping us all organized and doing all the things that, that some of us don't have a legal lawyer mindset to. In addition to that, she's coached at the club level in CWPA and has, I think, a unique perspective of being a female coach, similar to Katie. For me personally, I've had just personal discussions outside the sport of water polo of people being really surprised about how I took something that was an isolated incident to them so personal, right? When George Floyd was murdered. And it wasn't because I knew him. It wasn't because, I've ever felt that threatened for my life in that exact situation. But because I've had prior experiences, being harassed and pulled over 50 times by police officers, I could relate to it to an extent because I have had, extreme cases of racism within our own sport of water polo. It made me look back at my time with some of the people I thought were my closest friends, the people that were some of my groomsmen at my wedding, and realizing that I never felt protected or supported the way I had ever wanted to be. And rather than pointing the finger, someone else, I kind of looked at myself and say, you know what, I have two sisters that I love. I have a wife that I love. I have a mother that I've looked up to my entire life. I wonder if I've been the best ally for them. Have I protected them, in times when they've, faced sexism or just even felt uncomfortable? Completely unrelated to water polo. I remember experience traveling with my wife when we were just still dating in Thailand, and I was just exhausted from jet lag. And he said, why don't you just go downstairs and get some street food? Her perspective is, are you crazy? I'm not going out in a foreign country at night by myself as a woman in an area that I don't feel comfortable. Didn't even cross my mind. So the reason why I'm bringing that up now is there might be instances with our own teams that, we just don't think are a big deal because we're coaches, we're established, we're mature, we're confident, all these different things. But our athletes, that are just trying to basically, prove themselves to us and fit in and go through a whole work on their studies and do so many different things. The last thing they should have to worry about is feeling isolated or even whether it's intentional or not. Omar can kind of elaborate on a very well-known athlete by the name of Ashley Johnson, who plays on the women's national team now. But she's been the only one, and it's been pointed out to her that she was the only one on the team, right? Even though she hasn't been called the N-word directly, she's felt isolated and alone at times, okay? Omar's had in-depth conversations with the very well-known, respected international coach, who I think has opened his eyes a little bit to realizing that eyes weren't as open as he previously thought they were. So with that being said, when we talk about do better, it really does start with ourselves and figuring out how we can do better in our own personal lives on a daily basis. So when it does come to coaching, it's almost second nature and we don't have to think about it, right? Omar, do you want to share some things without going too much into detail of what I touched on?
Growing up playing the sport, right? Like I said, it was just inherently non-inclusive and inherently gender biased and racist. And I can think of instances, for me, at the semifinals of NC2As after the sprint, I got kicked in the chest and somebody dropped the N-bomb on me and I got ejected. And the reasoning I was given was they didn't want me to retaliate. And not just that, my coach actually agreed with that decision and we lost that game by a goal. And there was nothing in me that wanted to retaliate. I wanted to win that game. And then when I came up to the national team squad and I talked about that instance, I was looked at as being weak, right? And as I kind of established a position for myself with the national team, when younger athletes of color would come up, they often made it 2 weeks, a couple months before they would quit because of all of the things that they had to endure. And it's kind of what linked Janai and myself. When he came up with the national team, he was like my little brother. And, I can't tell you the number of times he would endure racial slurs when we were competing together. And it just continued on and on and on. And throughout the years, so many athletes of color have reached out to me and told me that these things were happening. And kind of like what Janai had mentioned earlier, I often felt guilty because after the Olympics, I went off to finish med school and did my residency, and I wasn't around to help defend some of these other athletes, and I would hear these horrible stories, of how they were treated just based on the color of their skin. And when I came back, after I was established in my career, I came back to be the team doctor for the women's team in 2013 to 2016. And it was watching the same thing over and over again. I felt, in a way, I just felt confused that, we're in that era, 2013, and we're still dealing with the same kind of racial injustice, right? And at the time, Ashley Johnson was coming up into the ranks, she's arguably the best female athlete to ever play the sport. And when she was coming up, she didn't have any support, any nurturing. She was looked at, she didn't live in California, she lived in Miami, and she was looked at as being not focused, not serious about the sport. It was always the same thing. It was the same thing that people had said about me. It was the same thing people had said about Janai. They're talented, but they're not focused. They're talented, but they're not serious. And they would say that about Ashley, repeatedly. And, there were instances in these backdoor meetings where I would often talk to the staff about, I would literally say, if she were white, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. She would be starting and it would be done, right? And you would have thought I'd killed somebody the way that they responded. And then, it wasn't until Junior Worlds when she just dominated the entire tournament and we won outright that she started to get some playing time. And the entire quad, I was trying to convince her privately to stay because she was being so unfairly treated. And she decided to finally stay. And when the coach finally named her as a starter, there was almost a team mutiny where everybody on the team just felt like this is unfair. And not once did anybody step back and say, she's just an amazing athlete. It was more of the same, she's not focused. She doesn't even want to be here. And I can honestly tell you without a second's hesitation, if she were white, every single one of those athletes and all of the staff would have taken her under their wing the second she came on because they could have ridden her to a gold medal. But because she was black, she was looked at as not being serious. But anyways, they went on to win the gold, and, success breeds good emotions, I guess, because now all of those same people are saying that they've been fighting with us for inclusion. And then, like Janai said, over the years, there's been so many of these athletes that we've watched this happen to with no recourse.
Entire teams like Commerce.
Yeah, and we see this all the time. A Commerce player comes up on the national level and she's looked at unfairly because she's not white, and we just, and, I said this on the last call and I'll say it now, I hear this all the time about, well, Janai made it, or you made it, or Ashley made it. So, that's the American dream. But we fought uphill, man. We ran uphill to accomplish these goals. And for every one of us that's made it, there's been 1,000 that have failed, right? Because you're going up against unrealistic odds. And so unless you have everything, right? Unless you're talented and you have this incredible drive to succeed in the face of adversity, you're set up to fail. And this is the whole purpose of the Alliance, is to try to make our sport more inclusive and to make people around understand and educate them so that they can see this coming. Because what athletes don't realize is when a young athlete, a BIPOC athlete, comes into the program, often they are the only one, or one of just a handful of athletes of color in this entire club team. And so they don't have people they can identify with, and they're looked at differently from the second they join. And so if other athletes don't do their best to nurture these players and educate the teammates around them, the coaches around them, the officials, then this player is going to be treated differently and often poorly their entire career, even from their own teammates. And the goal is to try to educate and stop this from happening.
Moving forward, right, kind of just a brief history. We're going back almost 3 decades of us old guys playing, starting the national team. But we're talking about today's, I've spoken with high school athletes. They're absolutely love their club teams because they love the sport. That their coaches have them try to include them, as much as possible. But at the same time, they have 1 or 2 teammates that say some extremely derogatory things, and they don't really know who else to reach out to. So this Alliance has been able to, to talk to someone that looks like them or sounds like them or had similar experiences, have made them feel a little bit more comfortable. I almost want to call it like PTSD of stuff they've had to deal with. And we as coaches may not even be aware of what's going on. I kind of relate things to in my life outside of water polo. But if you haven't been, being a white male, maybe you haven't been the only white male on your water polo team. But if you can kind of imagine, for me, if I was trying to go to a retreat where it was all women, it might sound exciting for the first part, but at the same time, it's going to seem unique, right? Like I'm just not gonna fit in as much as I want to fit in with all the women. They might be talking about things that I can't relate to, menstrual cycles or hair salons, things like that. And all of a sudden, even if they're not saying anything derogatory, they're excluding me from conversations, unintentionally. So if you guys happen to coach athletes now or in the future that may be different than from the majority of your team, find unique ways, whether it's private conversations, group conversations, to really make sure that they're being heard, respected, received. And Omar keeps using that word nurtured, because as coaches, it's not about X's and O's, right? Anybody can download YouTube videos on how to coach water polo. It's how we create the team culture, and makes people trust and respect each other, and create a winning dynamic, because your athletes are playing for each other and for you.
Yeah, so does anyone who's joined, thank you all for coming, do any of you guys have any specific questions for the members of the Alliance, or scenarios that you've been in that you'd like advice on, or thoughts about how this conversation might change the way you coach or run your club, or how it could, or anything like that? They are really good at answering questions and bouncing ideas off of.
Yeah, I'll ask a quick question. First of all, thanks for sharing your stories. Disheartening to hear, but important to hear. I'm curious, so I'm a club water polo coach out at Boston University, small little corner of water polo out here. What are your suggestions on making a more inclusive club team at the college level? I don't recruit. We do a little on-campus marketing to try to scoop up those who might have played, probably, coming to school here in Boston from California, someplace where they probably got exposed to some good polo. We try to scoop those kids up and, feel like we're pretty inclusive, but I'm a white guy. So, open to any suggestions on how to make sure that we're thinking about that, at least, the college club level.
I think Janai and Omar can definitely speak more towards the governing organization and body and policies in terms of that. But first, I just wanted to say I have had a lot of teammates from Hawaii go and play at BU, and they found it to be a really inclusive team. So I just wanted to thank you for that first. So if Janai and Omar want to talk about the governing organization aspect, and then I can talk more to the one-on-one aspect of talking to athletes.
I think that it's difficult in your situation because you're dealing with athletes that have to be intelligent enough to get into the university and hopefully have prior water polo experience. So it's not really your job to even recruit, a diverse team. But having conversations, like I said, individually and as a group, to really make sure that it's not just water polo people are focused on, but really the relationships. And it sounds like it's going really well. So Kari, I think your advice of whatever you're going to say is going to be kind of universal for anybody on this call.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all my teammates who went and played at BU, which actually was kind of a lot of them on the club side, ended up, they've been playing Masters Polo in California and anywhere they can find it. So I think you're doing an amazing job specifically of, implementing the level of the sport and everything like that. We just did a team leaders call with a few of the players earlier. And I honestly thought it was the coach's call. I'm not sure why. But the advice I gave was, especially when you're coaching young male or female undergraduate athletes, in my case, they're all male. I think it's important to have discussions with them in a way that isn't necessarily condescending, I think, because at least when I was an undergraduate, I was very headstrong. And, I think everyone goes through a period of their lives where they think they know everything, right? And so they can get really defensive, maybe if they have an attitude that they don't realize is maybe preventing the team from becoming more diverse, or maybe having a more including atmosphere, things like that. So I think it's important, at least for the undergraduate club side, to talk to athletes one-on-one and make them, feel like they're having a conversation as opposed to like lecturing someone. I found has been the most effective for me personally.
One thing actually I learned on the last call from one of the club presidents was their bylaws that are, public, and really defining what is acceptable and not acceptable. And I don't, as of right now, I don't think CWPA has a zero tolerance policy that's defined, similar to what USA Water Polo is working on. But on your individual teams, you know, I think letting it be known ahead of time, you know, almost like a syllabus is if you're a professor, you know, what what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what are consequences going to be. Omar's a little person with a scientific call and scientific mind, and so he kind of looks at everything objectively. But I think that's going to really help if everything's laid out ahead of time.
I think too, as as club coaches, not recruiting and just kind of getting whoever walks on our deck. It's not necessarily about. I mean, I think we do still need to figure out ways to increase diversity and equity in club water polo. But I also think it's about how can your current team and you as a current coach help the generations that come after your current girls and guys who play for you. You know, how can you as a team have community outreach and help kids get into the water that usually wouldn't get into the water? And, you know, with their experience in water polo, how can they help get into different communities? And so I think, you know, a lot of it is not necessarily who you're going to be able to get to play for you, but how the people who do play for you help spread the diversity and the equity in the sport.
And I think too, a lot of that comes from the leadership and how you coach. And at least for me personally, my philosophy I think is very specific. And I know it's really hard with college clubs, right? Because they're governed by the students administratively and CWS. But I think college coaches can make a huge impact because, you know, no field is completely insulated from other aspects of life. And I think water polo is a perfect example of that, because if you're a coach and you're cultivating water polo IQ, it also means you're developing critical thinking skills, right? Like creative problem solving skills or the ability to see situations from a big picture point of view. And those skills are all necessary for athletic development, but like they're also extremely vital, I think, for character development. And I think talking about, you know, equity and inclusion not applies to character growth, but also your professional development as well, especially when you're coaching undergraduate or graduate students, right? And I think if you're a club coach, especially collegiate club coach, if you're modeling and cultivating, you know, character aspects like integrity or work ethic, or, you know, advocating for equity and equality while relating it to water polo, right? Like development, the athletic development, I think coaches can make a huge impact on the team culture and on the athletes' lives. And, you know, I think as coaches, we can be extremely impactful by ensuring high standards for everything we as coaches do and everything our athletes do, you know, whether it be in the pool or on deck, wherever else. I think, you know, whether it's at practice with your own team and your athletes or at a tournament, if you're speaking up, if a fellow coach maybe is, you know, told something like seemingly harmless by a referee, or, you know, if you hear your own athlete say something potentially harmful to a colleague or an opposing team's player or coach, I think your actions, the way you demonstrate how you carry yourself, can make a memorable impact, right? And inspire your athletes to act in a similar way going forward. I can't, you know, I think at least for maybe all of us, at least for me, I have so many memories of seeing my coaches or my teachers act in a way that made me really respect them, and they advocated for someone else, you know, or they were maybe really addressing the importance of cultivating character aspects, and that stayed with me my entire life. And I would think back to that moment often, and I think that's how club coaches, I think, can especially make a huge impact.
Yeah, and we have to consider that, you know, not all kids that we coach come from families that value inclusiveness or diversity or equity. And I mean, I can't tell you how many girls I had texted me like this summer, hey, I need you to know that I'm on my way to a protest. I can't tell my parents because they would kill me, but I need an adult to know where I am. Like, you know, and I'm like, okay, well, you know, just make sure you have your water and your cell phone's charged and call me when you're done. And I support you and I'm proud of you. And it just really means a lot to them to have an adult figure who, you know, encourages and supports them through these things that are even harder for them because they're separating themselves from the values that they were raised from, and they're questioning everything. And to be there to support them and to help them learn and grow in that is just invaluable to them.
And I just want to say, go ahead, Janai. You look like you were going to say something.
No, I was going to ask a question for the group, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, I think especially if, at least for me, like I'm the only female coach on the Big Ten side, and I'm also the only non-white coach as well. And for me, like stepping onto the deck in the state of Indiana, at first it was with swimming. It wasn't with water polo. But coming from Hawaii, where I guess, it's so diverse that I've never had an experience where I walk on deck and I don't look like everyone else. And so when I walked on deck for the first time, it was really jarring for me. And other coaches actually helped make that experience a lot more pleasant. Like I have had, not with USA Swimming at least, I've been, physically assaulted by an official who's screaming racial, slurs at me. Or I've had, parents come at me, but at least with the CWPA, people like Matt have been super welcoming and kind. And I've actually, felt like I can talk to him about almost, anything. He's always giving me advice. And I do feel, safer, I think. And just modeling that behavior for your athletes, I think is really important. I've had experiences where I'm at a tournament and the ref says like, you can have the pink sheet because you're the girl. And I'm like, oh, that's fun. What a great comment, or maybe one of the athletes from another team in the Big Ten says like, hey, who's your daddy to me while we're shaking hands. And I think especially as a coach, addressing those issues and modeling good behavior in front of your athletes and also talking to them from like a development point of view, not just punitive, I think will be really helpful. But also thank you, Matt.
The downside to that is you get text messages from me at 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern time about me realizing that you're in Hawaii at the time.
Well, I work on East Coast time anyway, but it's really appreciated. Thank you so much.
And honestly, this is why I think Dan and I have been, good friends ever since we hit it off, is because we're in it for the right reasons and we surround ourselves with good people. And hopefully we can influence the people that haven't been on the same page rather than to succumb or even just ignore small things. And I think, the question I want to ask the group is if you guys have had any individual incidences you guys have been aware of, or things that you maybe are looking back at that maybe you weren't even aware of, and kind of use that as a discussion point.
I had one. It wasn't a racial thing. It was a sexual orientation situation where I was not as the coach. This was with our USA Water Polo Club. As the coach, I did not know this was going on. And unfortunately, when I heard about it after the fact, it hurt me a little bit. But I give the kid that I had a young man last winter come out for the first time, and he actually at practice walked in. I asked if he could talk to the team, so pulled the team out of the water. He handled it great. One of the reasons why he wanted to do that was because he wanted to try to stop at least some of the kids, making those off-color jokes that a lot of times people just go, "Oh, boys will be boys." And he told me, he said that I had no idea because it wasn't like they were doing it. They were doing it in private, so there'd be no way that I would have known since he didn't say anything. And I actually give the kids that were there a lot of credit because they listened, they asked some questions, and I know of at least two of them that apologized. And they all embraced him, they all gave him a hug, which was really, for me, great to see. So it turned into a positive. And actually, that kind of led a discussion between myself and the other two coaches that were on deck, what we can maybe do to make sure that one, doesn't happen again. And two, we actually started talking about race because, we were blunt. We just said, let's face it, we're in Michigan. This is the whitest sport in the state right now. You just don't see many minorities playing the sport. So, what can we do? It also turned into kind of a socioeconomic discussion too, just because, let's face it, I've already sat here and talked, when we first got together, I talked about going down to Florida. We've had people go out to California to JOs. It's like, generally speaking, it's the families that have the means that get the biggest benefits because they're able to do everything. So that kind of led us to have a discussion as a club to figure out what we can do to lower the bar of entry. And actually now, unfortunately, COVID happened. So haven't been able to try anything. But now it's actually led us to come back around and kind of re-examine some things and re-examine where we're at to try to make it available to everybody. and to make everybody feel, welcome. So I know there's going to be a lot of trial and error in our part, but hopefully, it's going to work out for the better. Because we truly here in Michigan want the sport to grow. Both little kids, collegiate club. I'd love to see more universities in the state added as varsity. I say that 5 days removed from when Michigan State decided to cut their swimming program for good. So it's frustrating to see that happen, because I think that's a step backwards for aquatics, and I want to see water polo expand. So I'm open. I'm all ears when it comes to ideas about how to do this.
Is Janai? Janai's not frozen. Sorry. Go ahead, Janai.
No, I was just listening. Yeah, unfortunately, finances plays a huge part, in the entire history of our sport. It's not as inaccessible as polo, but it's pretty close to it. And even with swimming, because you can theoretically have more athletes at a swim practice, therefore your pool time, gets more access and is broken down, by less cost as well. So there's some hard fixed costs. One thing that Omar and Akari's division of the Alliance has been working on is statistical analysis, and looking at programs like Commerce and how they've been successful, creating student athletes. Supposedly, Bobby said that the graduation rate for high school is 100%, which is unheard of for almost any demographic. So understand that if you can invest in some time and resources as a city, as a program that's funded, by the county, into a sport like water polo that does everything that we all know that it does for individuals as far as discipline and character and camaraderie, and all of a sudden now your demographics in an inner city Michigan area, whether it's Detroit or somewhere else, you have student athletes that are playing club water polo, but really succeeding in the classroom and going on to do good things, is that could actually, save that city money in the long run. So having the statistical analysis behind it is going to be extremely useful, that we just go, here, this is what happened in New Jersey, this is what happened in Commerce. Here, Matt, take this to Detroit, take this to somewhere else. And I'm just saying Matt because he's on my screen right now. But it's going to help programs across the country as far as access to pool availability, and even maybe potentially some funding as well. One thing, Omar had to leave because he's got to go on to another call as an ER doctor. But he also is talking about, from this call alone, if anybody wants to get involved with the Alliance more, we would love to have anybody lend any type of expertise. My primary focus has been in the education division, and it's interesting because I started off like, okay, I helped develop splash ball. I've coached all different age groups through college and national teams. The water polo aspect of the education is very small, because we can kind of cut and paste almost what we have from CWPA, from USA Water Polo, from Wolf and Brad's Tips of the Weeks. But it's more of putting into writing, putting into practice policies of discussions like this, and being able to, give it to other clubs that aren't as established, whether it's, time frame or just, consistent coaching staff or leadership, whatever it might be. So I think that if anybody wants to volunteer with that, that'd be great. If anybody wants to volunteer in the mentoring side of programs, or if you have athletes, that have gone on, you keep in touch with their lawyers, doctors, teachers, balloons, circus clowns, whatever it might be, anybody that wants to kind of give back to other future water polo student athletes and kind of mentor them into their professional careers, because we all know that water polo is not going to pay the bills. It's going to be the other professions. That's another huge thing. So I'll send out information not only on the Alliance, but also some of the historical references that was created, slides that were created by Mariko Rooks and her team at Yale, talking about the systematic racism within aquatics. And I think that can really highlights in a visual way of some of the injustices that were kind of helped lead to the disparity in aquatics that we are at today.
And I think sorry, go ahead, David.
Oh, so hey, Janai, I've got a couple things I wanted to throw in. So Alex Donis in Hialeah has done a really good job working with his city folks to, kind of create a space where either water time, city funds, whatever that case may be, kind of have been freed up for the lower socioeconomical, which, in his case happen to be Hispanic folks. But he's done an amazing job, and he's got a good sized team of kids that are, in that, very low socioeconomical level playing for him, and that, they're enjoying that experience, and they get to be part of teams and go to tournaments and all these different things, but they've got great success there. This is a space where I've been dabbling with the city of Gainesville where I am, and we've had some conversations with the city, and even pre-Corona it looked like we were going to get some movement, but now that Corona happened, it's kind of been put on hold. But if you have any guidance or advice or statistics that can kind of help us lead those conversations with the city, because a lot of times, well, here in Gainesville anyway, it's pretty much a brick wall when we go to talk to the city. So anything that you guys have that could kind of help sell those stories, because it is, there's a huge opportunity for us to grow our programs, and to tap into some of those, those groups of lower socioeconomical kids that can't necessarily afford the water. And I mean, it's an expensive sport. Let's just be totally honest. Just our water bills alone are outrageous. So, anything in that space would be, huge to help us move our programs.
I think if you can maybe get the statistics from Commerce, just because of their 100% matriculation rate. In addition, like the city of Commerce is what funds the Commerce Aquatic Clubs, right? And so that's where they see their success. And so I think maybe, and I think our research team is actually working with Commerce to get those numbers and everywhere else. And I'd be happy to get your contact information. But I think also, I'm assuming you coach Collegiate Club Water Polo as well. And to your point,
I do. I'm with Florida.
Right. So I think
okay,
right. So to your point of pool accessibility and introducing the sport, like for example, I think there are two main governing organizations for age group and masters water polo, I think, in the US, and it can be really expensive to play. And so I think using your club time, and especially if your club is registered, I think as a nonprofit, you can put in like water polo clinics and use your pool time to introduce the sport to age group athletes around you. And you're also affecting your athletes because you are introducing them how to be impactful in a way that advocates for diversity and equity, right? So I think that could be one way you could actively, I think, mentor your collegiate athletes to making an impact in the community around you. I think that also doing so might actually help you with your policy proposal to the city of Gainesville, I think.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure if that really helped, but for, I think, Matt's point too, I think especially hitting the part of like the entry bar is so high, right? So I think that has to start with getting pool accessibility, which I think is so difficult to do. But I think if you can encourage your collegiate athletes to do policy work in this, or even implement, clinics, water polo clinics, like in the Midwest, it's almost impossible to play water polo in certain states. So I think just using your influence and your impact and mentoring your collegiate athletes and your age group athletes to help make the sport more accessible will be really helpful for many people in your community.
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Dave, this is Dan. If you send me an email tomorrow, I can put you in touch with some folks up in Chicago through the Parks District that they've done something similar to what you're trying to accomplish. So maybe you could, I'll get you in touch with them. You could kind of model some of what you're trying to do from what they've done.
Dan, do they work for the city of Chicago? Because I know that's how Commerce is. Like Bobby's actually an employee of the city.
Right. Chicago Parks District, the city employs a staff which gives them access to pools. It opens up a lot of doors that even if you had money, you couldn't buy. So politically, it's extremely important to get that type of backing if you're trying to do something within the government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we struggle just to get any water space, between the swim teams and, the city's all about, public lap swim, and that's kind of their primary focus. But, it's just a challenge just to get any water. So it's a thing.
Well,
I think if you
if you can model it from something like what they've done, you also have a guaranteed group of coaches because they're going to pay the coaches, minimum wage. So it's not like you're trying to scrap around and find coaches. It's a really successful model, but it will take some work on your part. But I think it's something that they could probably give you some good advice.
Yeah, I'd like that contact, Dan. That'd be great.
Janai, sorry, did someone already talk about why like Commerce was able to get money from the city to support Commerce Aquatics in terms of like why the matriculation rate was so important? I can't remember if that was this call or the other one.
No, it's. I think it was just the framework that was set up back when Brenda Villa actually was a kid herself. So it's been almost 3 decades, to be honest. And so they didn't really even start taking statistics until Omar reached out to Bobby just this last year, because it's just been everyone that he knows that he coached has all gone on to college. So now it's being formalized so that it'll be easily presentable and duplicate, be able to replicate.
I think, David, if you can get that information too, in addition to the Chicago information, I think that would really help, because the whole way they're all able to continue get funding from the City of Commerce is that they're able to prove that their matriculation rate also, and like, I guess the city putting money into those programs has contributed to lower crime rate, overall higher standards of living and things like that. So I think if you can also show that you're actually saving the city money in the long run, especially in terms of incarceration or things like that, I think that would actually be the most effective, right? Because money talks. So
Yeah, that's
they look
great.
at it as they'll actually have an ROI as a county or city.
Right.
So
I have an interesting perspective of possibly getting some, I guess, money or statistics that you can present that'll show that water polo does, benefit the community. I coach the Arizona team in Tucson, and Tucson is pretty much half college town and half a military town. And one thing that I've been working on the last year or so is I've actually been training about a half dozen Air Force airmen that are trying to be either pararescue or crows. And so one thing that I've heard a lot of is that a lot of Navy SEALs, because it's the most prestigious and familiar thing that people have heard of, Navy SEALs, a lot of them are water polo players. And so I'm trying to carry that over with, Tucson, that we're recruiting Air Force guys and welcoming them to, Masters water polo. And one thing that could translate to at least club water polo for some people is that I've had a couple Navy ROTC players that became SEALs, or at least special forces for the Navy. And so if you're, in a college town, maybe that's something you can stretch to probably get some support from your local base. And hopefully, luckily for us, our pool time is super cheap. It's super available because we're a small city, but we're hoping that we can merge the two together, because we really are a college town and we want water polo to grow. And if kids can see the relationship between the two, perhaps even kids that have no interest in water polo but are excited about the military will be interested in water polo. And that's a super easy way to grow water polo in Tucson, because we are a military town. And so I'm wondering if anybody has any information or any statistics on that sort of stuff, on how.
I've been working on it for 3 months because supposedly water polo players have the highest success rate of any demographic to become Navy SEALs. I've spoken to about a dozen of my SEAL friends. There's a study done about 10 years ago. I think it was Mackenzie Fisher, someone like that.
It was Gallup. It was the Gallup.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like spent $500,000 on this research project, and that's how they identified water polo players as the best mindset as far as teamwork, most physically fit, all the different things that went in for them to spend millions of dollars training people for the SEALs, but they won't give it up. I've talked to Schofield. He put me in touch with some people. So I just haven't found the right person yet that will actually release that information. I think because the raw data has other like stuff in it that I don't know. That's my theory. But
Right.
But in terms of like numbers, Victor, if you're looking for like the actual like the basic numbers they released, it's that if you played water polo at a high school level, then you are most likely to be able to succeed passing through the specialized training for the Navy SEALs, whereas at least 10 years ago, the dropout rate for SEAL training was 67%.
Okay.
So I don't know if that would help you, but that's a pretty large number for a dropout rate, I think, because, you know, by the time you get to training as a SEAL, you're already identified as one of the elites of the military, right?
Right.
So from there, 67% 10 years ago was the dropout rate. So they commissioned that study and they found that if you played water polo in high school or later, then you were most likely to succeed passing and completing training.
Right.
When that study came out, the stats that I saw, Janai, were that if you played water polo, you had an 82% chance of succeeding as a SEAL. If you wrestled in college, you had a 45% chance. And I forget what the attrition rate was if you did neither.
yeah, those are the two highest demographics, and water polo is like twice as high as the next closest one.
Right.
And then, so I went to Coronado High School and played for Randy Burgess, was where the SEALs actually train. And so that's why I have so many friends that are SEALs now. And at one point, he had, I think, 13 for 13 athletes all make it through. So he has 100% success rate. So they love him, and they still won't give him the raw data.
Well, it might be also like an agreement they have with Gallup maybe too, just because that's such a, yeah.
Right. They try to keep that information on the DL to protect those people.
I'm sure there are a lot of like NDAs and stuff like that. Sorry, go ahead, Janai.
No, I'm just saying, like, I mean, this is just 1 hour of our lives, and I'm hoping that, I mean, I personally came away with a few things. I'm hoping each of you did as well. But I think even more importantly is the continued discussions, the continued work. Matt, you know, you said yours evolved from race and went into socioeconomics. And I think that's a huge part of it. Race plays a part in socioeconomics, but so it's a double factor, I think, combination when it comes to barriers for our sport. But realizing that, just kind of continue to go on. I don't know how often you guys as coaches talk outside of, you know, tournament and polo stuff, but, you know, really focusing not just within your own clubs and teams, but as a division, as a unit, you know, as collegiate club coaches, come up with some even better and, you know, policies or practices. I think is going to be huge. So I'll make sure that, Ian, you share my information with everybody. And when I say my information, I'll give you my email, but I actually check it less than I text. So just text me if you guys have questions to follow up with. But I know some of the stuff, you know, that's going to be data stuff will obviously be via email. But I love that this is the start of something beautiful that's just going to help our sport evolve. And I guess the fact that we had coaches on here, hopefully the next time I do this, we can have an even bigger group. And you guys, what we're looking for is, regardless of their positions, is just people that are comfortable enough, you know, to have difficult conversations. So I have to run myself, but thank you guys all. I know I personally am trying to do better, and it sounds like you guys are all doing it. So take care, and I'll give you my contact information via Ian.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ian, for letting us do these calls. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job, Ian.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody.